welcome to GlideFast On Air. I'm Lauren Jankowski, the Marketing Manager here at GlideFast, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, New in ServiceNow, Breaking Down the Common Service Data Model 3.0. Before we get started, I'd like to give you some background information on GlideFast. GlideFast Consulting is a consulting firm that is dedicated exclusively to ServiceNow. As an Elite ServiceNow Partner, our expert team of developers and architects have worked on both sides of the table, the customer side and the consulting side. Our company was founded by ServiceNow architects, and we're proud to have a team of over 150 experienced consultants, an average CSAT score of a 4.8 out of 5, and many more accolades, as you can see here. As a perk of attending today's webinar, we'll be giving away a $50 Visa gift card. We'll announce the winner at the very end of today's session, so be sure to stay on for the entire webinar. I'm excited to introduce our presenters for today. We have Mark Harper, a solutions consultant at GlideFast, and Brian Wong, an ITOM architect on the GlideFast team. We'll also have Rob Geen join us for the Q&A section, who is also an architect on the GlideFast team. I'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout today's session, so please send in any questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to answer them. Mark, you can take it from here.
I appreciate that, Lauren. So before we get started, I just want to quickly go over what the agenda is for today's session. We'll be spending a brief moment just covering at a high level what the CSTM actually is and the purpose of why we want to spend some time understanding more about it. And then we'll transition into the real meat of today's discussion, understanding what is new in version 3 compared to version 2. So we'll look at some of the capabilities that allow us to track our overall progress, utilizing some of the new dashboards in regards to CSDM and CSDM alike. And then we'll transition into a demo where my colleague Brian Wong will lead us through reviewing each of those dashboards themselves and how some of those new wizards allow us to adopt and align to CSDM. No good CSDM discussion is worthwhile without an actual use case that we can try and wrap our heads around. And we'll also take a look at some of the new documentation that's available to us in regards to identified use cases by ServiceNow. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with a Q&A session. So please enter some questions into the question manager, and we'll look to address as many as we can at the end of the session. So let's get started with a quick review of what the CSDM actually is. At its heart, it's a standard set of service-related terminology that defines the various different classes across the ServiceNow platform. And the reason we want to adopt the CSDM is we're essentially placing data into the right places where ServiceNow is going to expect that data to reside, so that you can leverage out-of-the-box dashboards, out-of-the-box reports, not have to customize and tailor performance analytics and just get going straight away. So understanding the terminology and the taxonomy is vital. And the third iteration of the CSDM allows us to understand it with a little bit more clarity and also tie us into other areas of the ServiceNow platform where the soon-to-be actually has dependencies. And it'll be in this session today where we'll be going over and understanding all of the benefits that come along with 3.0 compared to what we may already understand with version 2. And then we also just want to cover what CSDM is not. It's not going to be an application that you install that remediates and fixes all of the issues that you may have in regards to configuration management. It is still acting as that framework across the platform. So while you may see various material out there that says CSDM is not a product that you install, we're starting to blur that line a little bit with the Paris release. As you will see later in this presentation, where we actually have a module in the application Navigator that assists us with CSDM adoption. Essentially, we will be focusing a lot on what's new in the 3.0 release today. But if you do check out our GlideFast YouTube channel, you'll actually see that just a handful of months ago, we did an overall CSDM presentation with the CSDM product owner from ServiceNow, Mark Bodman. So that goes into a great discussion of the fundamentals and the key reasonings behind CSDM. So supplementing that with today's discussion should bring you up to speed with everything that you need to know in regards to the latest release and the fundamentals of CSDM. And speaking of those fundamentals, looking right here at the CSDM 3.0 overall data model, and we can see what's encapsulated in this current release. And each time I show this model to customers and end users, it may seem a little overwhelming up front. And in a 3.0 release, you'll be pleased to know that we have added an additional domain to the overall model. But one pleasing takeaway from this new domain that we see in the top right here, the foundation domain, is effectively leveraging data that already exists on the ServiceNow platform. We're just bringing it under the umbrella of the CSDM so that we have an understanding of the interaction points between the configuration items in the other domains and the interaction with those reference tables. So some of those foundational domain elements you should recognize quite quickly with the sys users table, groups table, and location information. In regards to other areas of the model, some of the other changes that you might recognize is the addition of the dynamic CI group. You'll find that in the managed technical services domain in the bottom left. This is trying to clean up the issue that we've had for a number of years, where customers that have already purchased the ITOM health and event management applications on the platform already had a table for what we call the technical service. And this conflicted a little bit with the initial CSDM release of the technical service as a slightly different use case. So what we've done is we've relabeled the event management technical service, and it's now become the dynamic CI group. And as we move forward in this presentation, we'll be touching on a little bit more about some of the key use cases as to why we want to leverage a classification such as this. Now, again, as I mentioned, it's a little bit overwhelming looking at that diagram. So sometimes it's easier just to group these different domains into a relatively easy to understand definition. So in the design area, the design domain, this is where we're really tracking the design and overall release of our IT environment. This is where our enterprise architects will be defining the business capabilities and the business applications that's used to deliver those business capabilities. This domain itself it's not exactly static, but it has a lot less change and it's less dynamic than what we see in the managed technical services domain. The managed technical services are really the groups of infrastructure and applications that's used to provide what we've designed out in that design domain. So the operational elements that you'll find in that area are what will align to incident, problem, change, vulnerability. Various different elements of the ServiceNow platform are going to align to those managed technical services. In the green domain is where we define our sell and consume. This is really where we're aligning to our service catalog and service portfolio. You'll have defined the different business services that we open up to end users and consumers, and they can request those business services that, again, delivered from an operational standpoint with the managed technical services. So different outcomes, different use cases, different areas of the platform that's involved, but just looking at it from a 10,000-foot view definition can help us really start to understand the intricacies of the 3.0 model. So let's just step a little bit further forward and we'll just quickly recap what some of the key what's new functionality is in the 3.0 release. As we just saw there in the model diagram, we have the new foundation domain, which is just the reference to other areas outside of the CMDB. We have what we'll see shortly, a new application navigation pane that groups together all of those domains into a module inside of ServiceNow. So it's quickly easy to find the information object or the application service rather than having to filter through the 50 different results when you type in application into the App Navigator. One of the important aspects of this presentation that I want, especially if you're a configuration manager, to come away with is a greater understanding of some of the relabeling of tables and some of the net new tables that are part of CSDM 3.0. So you might have done an upgrade to Paris and been a bit confused why some data is in what looks to be a slightly different place. Looking at this translation should really help us out. Brian is going to cover the dashboards that allow us to track our overall progress and make it a lot easier from adoption of CSDM. And then towards the tail end of this session, we're going to take a look at some of the additional use cases and the product views that ServiceNow has released that allow us to understand how products such as like ITOM and CSM relate to CSDM. Let's take a look at a couple of these in a bit more in depth. So we saw in our overall framework the foundation being referenced, but I just wanted to touch on these to make sure that you have a full understanding of the purpose and use cases of including the foundation domain in the CSDM model. So as I mentioned previously, these are not configuration items found within the CDB themselves, but you will notice that many of your configuration items have a reference to these different aspects within this domain. And this is what leads us to have much more effective reporting and capabilities around automation. So just talking about one use case that's very popular is associating the assignment group to a server or to an application service. This allows us to preset that assignment group as soon as the incident is generated or an alert is generated. Just that one additional step of automation without the manual intervention. You can get a bit more mature as well with a more detailed use case by aligning the products and the product models associated with application services. We can start looking at product end of life for a piece of software that is used to deliver one of your revenue generating application services. And you might want to proactively and automatically generate a demand if that comes within a certain time period, say 3 months of the expiration or end of life of that software model. So being more proactive rather than being reactive to changes and potential risks across your environment. As I mentioned before, we now have a somewhat of a product inside the ServiceNow platform related to CSDM. And this allows us just quick links to the various different tables and inside the various domains of CSDM, but it also launches some very useful dashboards that allow us to track how well we are conforming to the CSDM model. As I mentioned previously, a key reason for doing this is to make sure that the data is residing in the places where ServiceNow expects that data to reside. So outside of where the record exists, we also need to ensure we're using the appropriate relationships. So those relationships, you might not know all of them off the top of your head, and without having to now consult the CSDM white paper, leveraging some of these dashboards and wizards, it'll automatically select the appropriate relationship for you when you would generate your own models and taxonomy. So very useful for getting you off the ground and adopting CSDM and being able to track your overall maturity and leveraging CSDM overall. Taking a look at some of the relabeled tables. As I mentioned, this is a little bit into the weeds and the technicalities, but if you are a CDB manager, you need to really be aware of some of these changes that's occurred from the Orlando release to the Paris release. And using this as a reference, you can see the various mappings that we've updated, where we've, in a sense, promoted the concept of an application service further up the hierarchy. One thing I did want to point out as well in regards to the relabeling of application service, if you are on one of the early patches of the Paris release, you may have noticed that there will be 2 separate tables labeled as application service. This was just a defect in the base release of Paris. It has since been fixed, and it's very unlikely that you would actually witness that at this current time frame. But had you seen it in the past, that was just the reason in itself. That's all been cleaned up now, so you won't experience that issue. But we can see right here the different labelings that's come into effect, in addition to a brand new table that is available to us. The CDB CI service technical table now replaces the technical service that we leveraged previously. That was just at the service level with a service classification. So this allows us to effectively generate better reports, have a more segregated data points between our business services, our application services, and our technical services. Okay, at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Brian, who's going to cover us through some of the different trackers and available progress tracking that we have on the platform. And he'll step us through a live demo of leveraging CSDM 3.0.
Thanks, Mark. So one of the most common questions we get with CSDM is how do we really track progress? And how do we make sure that we're using the right tables? How do we make sure we're using the right relationships? A lot of us already, I think we said 50% of the people here know the white paper. So we kind of understand it from a conceptual standpoint. We understand that there's different domains. We understand that it's a phased approach to applying CSDM. That's the crawl, walk, run, fly stages. But really from an operational standpoint, a lot of customers find it difficult to kind of understand where those correct tables are. Am I using the correct relationships? And that's really been a challenge for a lot of customers. And that's really where these 3 dashboards come into play to really help you understand key metrics and data requirements that kind of impact not just CSDM, but your overall CMDB data. So we're gonna now just jump right into a demo. So for this demo, what I'm going to be actually showing is talking a little bit about some of the changes that Mark referenced. We're also going to look at the dashboards, and then we're also going to take a look at a modeling example, because I know a lot of customers struggle a little bit in terms of understanding how the modeling actually works within ServiceNow. So let's actually just jump into the my instance here to kind of show you it in a live instance. So the first thing I wanted to show is that CSDM navigation pane. So I'm actually going to type CSDM, and this actually brings up the CSTM application navigator. And as Mark mentioned, it's not really a product per se, but it's really kind of a starting point for users adopting CSDM to kind of understand what are some of the tables that are involved with CSDM, how it's broken out by the domains. So we have our design domain, we have our managed technical services, we also have our sell consume domain, and all of the associated tables are now listed under those domains. And what this really does is kind of remove some of the guesswork in trying to figure out, what table are they referring to when they say business applications. Now that it's listed under this domain, we can just click right into it. If I'm an application owner, and really take a look at all of the business applications and knowing that I'm going to the right table. The only thing, and this is available in all base instances as of the Paris release. The only thing different about this instance here is if you use service portfolio management, you'll also have 2 additional CI classes for catalog items, both on the technology side and the business side as well. But this is available out of the box on Paris releases. Next thing I wanted to show was the CSTM Data Foundations dashboard. So when I bring up this dashboard, as the name kind of implies, this is really showing our CSDM progress and the data that's within CSDM. The way this dashboard is structured, we have key indicators and then associated reports. And each indicator has a result, kind of measuring our success against that indicator. So if I take a look at the first one, business applications with application service relationships, looks like I'm not doing too well. About 7% of my applications have a service relationship. And this number is reflected here in this report. So about 82 of them. There's also a priority associated with these indicators. So when I look at a priority, this is going to change based on the weighting of an indicator and also the result. So depending on how well you're doing with each of these indicators, this could go up or down, low, medium, high, to really help you focus in on which are the key areas you really need to focus on. Additionally, what you're going to see is a remediation playbook URL. So these are really helpful for all the indicators. There's an associated link where if you click on them, what you're getting is an idea of what that indicator really is about. So how it's calculated, why it's a problem within the ServiceNow platform, what are some of the consequences of not adhering to that indicator. And then lastly, what's most important is really remediating that. So it actually links you to remediation plays that tells you what it's about, and then also gives you a step-by-step idea of how you're going to resolve that indicator. The way this dashboard is also structured is this, if you're familiar with the different phases of CSDM, this is actually broken out by the different phases: crawl, walk, run, fly. So in our crawl in our crawl phase, what we're really concerned about is business applications and its relationships to application services. In our walk phase, that's where we kind of transition into technical service offerings and their relationships to their parent technical services. In our run phase, that's where we're really diving into how the business uses technology. So business service offerings and their underlying application services and the infrastructure and application instances that are running to support that business service offering. Additionally, what you're going to see in this stage here is also custom service tables. So those of us that have kind of been on the platform for a while, we kind of know that there hasn't always been service tables like it exists now in the later releases such as Paris, right? And a lot of times customers have created their own service tables to be able to capture this information. But now that we have CSDM and in the 3.0 release, it's kind of more structured now. So what this indicator is really telling you is, are there custom tables that you've created that are now better suited for out-of-the-box tables as part of this CSDM release? And in a correlated indicator, it also tells you which services are using those custom tables and also where would it actually fit within the CSTM model. So is it a technical service? Is it a business service? Or could it be an application service? The last phase is the fly stage. What we're dealing with here are information objects. And information objects are how data flows within the type of data that is really flowing within the application. So what kind of data is stored in the database? This could be, HIPAA data, it could be PCI data, it could be PII information. That's really what this fly stage is talking about. So the next dashboard I wanted to take a look at is the CMDB Data Foundations dashboard. So this dashboard is dealing with, CMDB data. While this is not necessarily, related to CSDM directly, what this dashboard really tells you is key data elements within the CMDB that could potentially impact how you implement CSDM. And the way this dashboard is structured, we have about 11 indicators split between two tabs, Data Foundations and CMDB Insights. And our Data Foundations tab is really what we would consider higher priority items. And in our CMDB Insights tab, while these are also important as well, these would be considered lower priority items. Let's take a look at one of these indicators. So CI is processed via IRE. It looks like we're trending at about 67%. And what this indicator is really telling us is of all our hardware CIs, what is being processed through the identification and reconciliation engine. And the reason why this is important is because within your CMDB, you really have to have a mechanism that identifies and reconciles those CIs. And within the ServiceNow platform, that really is the IRE. And the IRE also tells you, what data sources have priority in terms of updating data. And that really ensures what data lives within the CMDB is going to be correct and accurate. Yeah, you could see some of the other indicators here. Key data elements that the CMDB will be looking for. Serial number, it's important to have that. It's also broken out by different classes. You better understand which of the classes are actually missing serial numbers. In addition, again, we have a remediation playbook URL. Clicking on any of these indicators is going to bring us to a playbook. That'll bring up, how it's calculated, why it's a problem, and then most importantly, like we mentioned before, the remediation of that indicator. Step-by-step guide on how that's going to be fixed. So the last dashboard I wanted to show is the application service dashboard. So this dashboard is focused on application services. So application services are really the operational element of a business application. So really what is actually running the service. So the infrastructure and application components map to a specific instance of a service. So this is really where service mapping comes into play, where you're really understanding the key infrastructure application components, how they're all mapped together that actually runs this application. looking at this dashboard, what we see are within application services, you really need to have key pieces of information. So things such as assignment groups, support groups, who actually owns the service, and additionally, application relationships, right, to the business service and also to the business application. Scroll down a little bit. Because application services are really mapped applications, it's important to understand like how they're mapped, right? So we have top-down discovery, which is our traditional service mapping. We have tag-based mapping. We could also create manual service maps. Additionally, we have dynamic CI groups, and then an understanding of when we have services that aren't mapped at all. So we don't have a population method defined. And that's really helpful to understand, because then the real value of having a mapped application is really when you're understanding the infrastructure that supports the services. So from a security standpoint, when you have a database or an application, how does that roll up into the business point of view? Also take a look at this related focus area here. What this is showing us is key classes that aren't part of application services. So application servers, we have databases, and then we also have hardware servers. An example of an application server would be Tomcat instances, you have Java servers. On the database side, all are specific instances that aren't part of applications. And this is important, as I mentioned earlier, for for security impact analysis, incident management, event management. Understanding these key components and how they tie back to the business is going to be critical. And if they're not tied to anything, they're kind of orphaned in a sense, and you really don't understand the true impact of those CIs. So now what I'm going to do now is actually do a modeling example using the CSTM framework. So kind of an end-to-end service model that kind of leverages the CSTM framework. So I'm going to go back to start from my CSTM Data Foundations dashboard and use one of these indicators to help start with the mapping process. So as an application owner, I could be using this dashboard to kind of understand where are some of the gaps within my CSTM implementation. So I'm going to take a look at this indicator here, app service missing a business app relationship. If I click on it, what I'm looking at is I'm the owner of the My Payroll production application. And what it's saying is I'm missing a relationship to a business application. But I know that this business application exists there, so I want to go and actually fix it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to look up my business application. And again, I'm going to use the CSDM application navigator to make sure that I'm going to the correct class. I'm going to click business application. I'm going to search that parent application for my production instance of My Payroll. When I click into it, this is the actual CI for that business application. I'm able to see the relationships to it. So it looks like there are some relationships to it already. And I'm also able to view that in the dependency view. So I have the business application. I have the higher level business capability for administering payroll. I also have an information object. So I understand for this application, it contains PII information. So personally identifiable information. That's part of this. That's what's stored in the database for this application. But what I'm missing is that application service layer and all the technology that supports that application. So I'm going to go into my application now to kind of build those relationships. Going back to my application service. Again, I'm going to use the CSTM App Navigator. Go to my application services under the Managed Technical Service domain. Click into that. And again, I'm going to look for my application. So this new view for application services is new for the Paris release, and this really is a kind of a guided setup for creating and modifying application services. It provides like a step-by-step process to make sure that you have all the necessary information, and also what you can also do is set the relationships to it. So down here in the relationship section, I'm able to build relationships to key CSDM domains, right? I know I need to create a relationship to a business application, but I also have the ability to create relationships to a technical service offering and a business service offering. So let me go ahead and search for my business application. It's my payroll. I'm able to select it, add it in. And while I'm in here, what I'm also going to do is, since I know that the technical service that kind of is used for this application, I'm going to add that in as well. So I know this is a Windows environment, and the technical services, that part of this is it's a virtual environment. So I'm going to add Windows Server Virtual, the technical service offering to it. Similarly, on the business service side, we know there's a mobile app for this. And that mobile app, the technology it uses is this application service. So I want to make that relationship so I understand from a business service side, this mobile app uses this application service. I'm going to add that in. And then I'm going to move over to my next step. So populating the application service. So populating means mapping the specific infrastructure and application components to this actual service. So I'm able to choose a method. And we have several methods, right? A lot of automated methods using top-down discovery. This is service mapping. If we have dynamic CI groups already created, as Mark mentioned, these are CMDB groups. Tag-based mapping for potentially cloud applications hosted in public cloud environments. And then we also have the option to manually create a service, which I'm going to do here just for simplicity's sake. So I'm going to make sure I'm going to map the components that are part of this application. So I know it's a Windows environment, so I'm going to search for my CI. And we're going to select the web server. So really, the entry point into this application service is a web server. So I'm going to select this as my population method to start off with. I'm going to save that, move on to the next step. And this is previewing the service before we make those updates, right? So I have all the CIs I'm going to relate it to. It's selecting the correct relationship, so I don't have to guess which one is correct based on the CSDM framework. And I also have my initial population method for mapping the infrastructure. I'm going to hit update here. And now my application service has been updated. So let's actually take a look at this application service. So what we're looking at here is really the service map for this My Payroll Prod application. So we know the entry point for this is really a web server. We have a web server, but I also know that this is a 3-tier app. It has a web server, it has an application server, it has a database server. Now I want to connect those components so I really fully understand what's involved in this application and what supports this application. So I can, since I'm using a manual method, I can manually add relationships to this CI. So I'm going to add the application layer. I'm going to add that in. And then finally, the data tier. We know there's a database server associated with it. That database server. So what we're looking at here is essentially a full service map for the infrastructure and applications that support this My Payroll production app service. Now, under normal circumstances, if we were using service mapping or tag-based mapping, these actually wouldn't be infrastructure components. These would be the actual application instances. So for example, from a web point of view, we could be using IAS or we could be using Apache. Same thing on the application on the database side. We might be using SQL Server or Oracle. That's the actual components we would be mapping from an application standpoint. And then we would be able to see the host that it's actually hosted on. But for simplicity's sake, we are going to just map the servers. So the last thing I wanted to show was, we did also map this fully using the CSTM framework to understand all the relationships. So I'm going to go back to my dependency view to kind of show that fully mapped service. Yeah, so this is essentially our fully mapped services using the CSTM framework. So we have our application service that we just mapped, all our infrastructure components, the web server, application server, database server. We also have our service offerings. We have our payroll business service offering, and we also have our technical service, and how that actually rolls up into an application, business application. So that this was the parent business application that supports this application service. So that's really what I wanted to show from a demo standpoint. This is really showing you leveraging the out-of-the-box capabilities with the wizard to be able to map a fully compliant CSTM application service and business application. So let me switch back over to the presentation here. Let's just kind of recap. So what we're looking at with the CSDM Data Foundations dashboard, just as we mentioned before, this is really tracking key CSDM indicators. How well is your CSDM doing? Is it compliant with the CSDM framework? And where there could be areas of improvement. The CMDB Data Foundation dashboard, this is really around key CMDB data metrics. The core data within the CMDB, how healthy is that information? Do we have a lot of duplicates? Do we have a lot of orphan CIs? Are we missing key data elements? That's what this dashboard really tracks. And then lastly, the application service dashboard, which I mentioned, this is really focused around your application services and the overall health of those mapped applications. So now I'm going to pass it over back to you, Mark, to kind of talk about a little bit about the use cases.
All right, appreciate that there, Brian. And yeah, hopefully people could see that we're now starting to put some of this reference material into the platform itself so that we can be a bit more self-reliant on understanding our progress that we're making in regards to CSDM. And for those that may be new to CSDM and not understand like the differentiations of the crawl, walk, run, and fly from like a maturity standpoint, again, that's covered in detail in our previous webinar in the CSDM series. That's available to you again on our GlideFast YouTube channel. But I did want to touch on some of the other additional benefits that's been part of the CSTM 3.0 package. With 2.0, we had a couple of white papers that supplemented the main CSTM 2.0 white paper that focused on how it's leveraged with SPM, incident and change. And with the 3.0 release, we've gone into much further detail and expanded it across many different use case areas. And we've got a separate document for each of these different consumers and associations with the CSDM. So many people are still looking for like real world examples of how they can apply CSDM. And rather than have an overwhelming library all in one document, we've broken it out into these different process areas and application areas where you can start to see additional domains like the customer domain associated with the CSDM domain. If you're having any trouble finding these white papers, please feel free to reach out to us. and we'll happily provide you with all of them or any of them that are of interest to you. So just moving on, I wanted to still include an actual example of an applied model of CSDM. And rather than have something that's specific to one niche area or one group, we try to keep it at a level that hopefully everybody on this call can understand. The likelihood is that you have some familiarity with the ServiceNow platform itself, considering we're in a CSDM related conversation. But you can start to see the different like modules, different classes that's involved in the CSDM that we've talked about, and how they're put into like a real life name and real life label. But one thing I really wanted to call out with this model is some of the differentiations that we would expect from the version 2 release. So one thing that you may not have applied in your previous iterations of CSDM is having any form of hierarchy of your business applications. But what we have in the 3.0 release, and it actually came with Orlando itself, is the capability of defining the architecture type of the business application. This fulfills the use case that a lot of organizations had, where they were trying to address the challenge of, is this a business application or another classification when it's looked at as a module? Because the various different modules that you have may have different owner information, different support group. The contracts that's associated with it are likely separate from the actual platform host itself. So you can see right here with this representation of ServiceNow, we have a platform host at the business application level of ServiceNow. And then each of the modules that are a part of ServiceNow that we subscribe to and pay a lot of money for, we have separate business applications, and we have those defined as a platform app. Each of those platform app business applications should have an application service associated with it. And that is the operational stack or implementation of that business application. And it's really at that application service level, the ones that we're seeing in orange right here, that we're associating with incidents, problems, and changes, because that's the operational nature that's used to deliver the business application. The other change that we're seeing right here is the dynamic CI group in action down at the bottom. So what we've got defined right here is all our Windows servers are now represented in a dynamic group. The major benefit that we can have with this is we no longer have to manually associate any CIs with that technical service or that grouping of services itself. ServiceNow is automatically going to search for any net new records and align it to that group. So this addresses one of the key use cases that a lot of customers have in regards to patching. We want to have a patch group that may be all Windows servers that's managed by the platform team. We create that dynamic CI group, we associate it with a standard change, and now we've got complete visibility to all of the Windows servers that's going to be associated with that patch schedule. And that level of automation is available in just a few clicks and allow us to have that audit trail and accountability of complete change management processes. We also see the connections to the various different domains as well. So the bridging between the design domain to the technical domain to the consume domain. And you can see the key relationships that's used that allows us to be compliant with CSDM. You may have seen as well in Brian's demo that we didn't have to know that a business application is consuming a application service. By using the out-of-the-box wizards, it already selects that for us and ensures that we're conforming to the standards and the design of CSDM. So hopefully you can use this as a reference model, be able to translate your existing services and applications that you have within in-house and align it to this translation of the ServiceNow platform that you likely understand. Okay, so we've come towards the tail end of our presentation, but I've seen the question manager light up with a number of questions come through. So I'm going to pass back over to Lauren, who is going to fire off some questions for us.
Yeah, lots of questions coming in. So the first one we have here from Andrew, the CMDB Foundation Data Dashboard, where we see CIs with a serial number, is this any way related to the IRE, specifically where serial number might not be an identification role for a CI class, so may not be a relevant metric? This is assuming IRE is not out of box.
Okay. So the dashboard itself with the insights is really just like any other dashboard you see on the platform. It's an associated filter that's looking at certain results. So we're not necessarily tying directly into the identification rules itself, but it's the idea behind what that dashboard is tracking is based on IRE. So if you've made modifications to the out-of-the-box hardware rule or some of the subsequent classes that don't factor in serial number, you might want to just modify that out-of-the-box dashboard to change the filter to align to how you've modified it. But as we know, serial number it's a very popular and one of the key identification rules across many of the identifiers. So it's worth it to try and keep those in there if possible. But if those modifications have happened and past the point of no return, then you can modify the dashboard to align to your process.
Yeah, and just to add to that it's not directly tied to the IRE rules, but from a CMDB, data foundations point of view, that really is a critical field, and that's why it's being tracked within that dashboard.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question. Business service and application service doesn't have direct relationship according to CSDM. How should it be connected, and what score did the dashboard show?
So the connections itself, I think we would have seen in the taxonomy slide. The in-between point is the business service offering, and that allows you to connect to the operational state on the application service. So I think in our example for ServiceNow, we were talking about like employee onboarding as like the business service, and then our organization has the capability of doing it with a mobile onboarding as one offering, or like a desktop enterprise business service offering. And those business service offerings are then associated with the application service. So the offering is the bridge between the two.
Yeah, and it's the same thing on the technical service side too. We have our technical service offering. That's kind of that bridge between the actual deployed technology and the service.
Perfect. We got a couple more. What is the difference between business application and application service?
Okay. So we touched on it a little bit, but at its most simple form is the application service is the installed stack of a business application. So you may just have a one-to-one representation of the business application to application service, but it is good practice to have an application service for each of the operating environments of that business application, that being like prod, dev, QA. And if you have multiple stacks in different geographical locations, those themselves will have a individual unique application service created for it. And this allows us to then associate the infrastructure to the appropriate application service. And then we can prioritize incidents, problems, changes, alerts based on the environment that's impacted.
Yeah, just like to Mark's point, the way to really think about this is from an operational standpoint. Your business applications aren't operational CIs. You wouldn't necessarily create, incident problem changes, but your app services are the ones that you actually do create those incidents and changes.
Here's some more for you. Seems I have data in the wrong table according to CSDM. How do I move it to the correct table? What are the risks?
Yeah, it's very, very common. Been doing this for quite a number of years now, and what was considered best practice maybe 6-7 years ago is no longer applicable. So you may have conformed and put your business applications in the application table before the business application table existed. So now you're trying to clean up that effort, and there is certain risks that may be involved. If you're moving to a completely different like extension tree of the CMDB, there's a good chance that certain fields, certain attributes might not be on the new business application class that you're moving to. So it's always good to back up your data first, review what these columns and attributes that you truly care about at your custom table or incorrectly defined table, and ensure that you add those to the business application class itself prior to moving that data. Because if you use a script to migrate it over to the other table and that column doesn't exist, that data disappears. So back up first, review the data that you truly care about and still being used. You don't need to store data just for the sake of it. And then you can perform the migration of data from one table to the next.
Perfect. And looks like we have time for one more question. We have an EHR hospital application in-house that is comprised of individual modules that have different support and ownership. What is the correct tables to put these modules into?
Okay. Yeah, so it all comes back a little bit to our ServiceNow example, and this was a challenge when you're trying to conform to like CSDM 2.0, where you're making a determination: do I have a hierarchy of business applications? And if you go back in time and review the documentation for the first CSDM, we were told that really shouldn't happen. It should be a standalone level. But now we have the architecture type toggle on the business application table itself, where we can define it being a platform app and a platform host. So those platform apps can be those different modules that you associate the different ownership and cost information. And again, those platform apps should have a corresponding application service or technical service, depending on what the actual object truly is.
All right, well, that looks like all the time we have for questions. And I know some of you may still have more questions, but we will definitely follow up with you guys and reach out to you to get all of those answered. You can also reach out to us at info@glidefast.com, and we'll make sure that we connect you with the right person to answer any of those questions. But now I would like to move on and announce the winner of our $50 Visa gift card giveaway. And it looks like the winner is Gordon Monet. Congratulations, Gordon. We'll be emailing your prize to you directly. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. We hope you learned lots of information. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@glidefast.com, or you could fill out a contact us form on our website. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.